Hello.
Joe, this is Walter talking from behind the camera. Before you, you see our two lovely panelists tonight who will be in charge of this. This is Sam and Carlos.
Hello.
Sam and
Hello.
Carlos, the one and the only Joe Dante. Let's give him a round of applause.
There's only one basis.
We just finished Gremlins, and I know these guys have prepared some questions for you.
I'm sure there are many questions like, how could this movie still be popular after 40 years?
Ageless. All right, let's get started. Sam, you want to go?
Yeah.
All right.
Am I being heard okay?
Did you
Yeah, I can
record?
hear you pretty good.
Awesome.
Did you record?
So our first question tonight, first off, thank you for taking the time to join us. This is awesome. But how
Recording in progress.
Sorry.
Now it started. You better ask the question again.
how did you break into the industry? Oh, sorry. How did you break the industry?
Break into the industry. Well, I was going to be a cartoonist. And so I went to the Philadelphia College of Art. And when I got there, they said, well, cartooning isn't an art. You'll have to take something else. And so I took film because there was a fledgling film class. This is like 1964. There were like, I don't know, 13 students in one camera. And we had to make, our little 16 millimeter movies and stuff. But in the meanwhile, I had a job at a trade magazine doing movie reviews, which I kind of enjoyed more than making these films that they asked me to make. And a friend of mine from New Jersey went to California to work for Roger Corman, who was making a lot of low-budget movies that involved hiring non-union young people. And I was asked to go out there and work in the trailer department because I had done a movie with John called The Movie Orgy, which was like a 7-hour compilation film that we used to take around to colleges. And so I had rudimentary skills in editing. And I became, along with my friend Alan Arkish, we became the trailer department for New World Pictures. And we learned a lot about how to make a movie just by trying to distill a movie down to 3 minutes and figuring out how many shots were needed to tell a story. And it was very educational.
Awesome.
Oh, hey Joe. A question I had was, what was a pivotal moment in your career that changed your perspective?
My perspective, well, frankly, getting any job in California was a big change for me. I had no idea what I really wanted to do since I wasn't going to be a cartoonist now. So I did find editing very interesting. And, editors are the unsung heroes of movies because the one difference between the movies and all the other arts is it's not the theater, it's editing. And I learned about putting shots together and how you can change the meaning of a shot or a scene just by removing one shot or adding another shot. And so I picked up all that. And so by the time I had made a number of trailers for a number of pictures, I had a chance to direct a movie because my friends, John Davis and Alan Arkish, we all said, well, we've kind of mastered the art of making trailers for Filipino women in cages movies, and now maybe we could make a movie of our own. And so we suggested to Roger Corman that if we could make a movie for him that would be the cheapest movie he'd ever made. And he said, well, you can do it if you keep making trailers, but you have to make the movie in 10 days. And we figured, well, in 10 days, how are we gonna make a movie that anybody could sell? And so we realized that if we wrote and shot the movie around the footage, the action footage that we had been using to make the trailers, we could make a movie about a bunch of starlets making different kinds of movies with different kinds of genres, using all of this action footage by dressing our actors in the same in the same clothes as the people in the movies. And this came on the tail end of Roger was making movies with nurses and teachers. There was these girls who would get in trouble and take their clothes off and stuff. But so we took that formula and we changed it to actresses. And so we made this pretty, I don't know, it's wildly sexist. I mean, this was 1970, 6. But it's pretty funny, and it's actually a very accurate portrayal of what it was like working on low budget movies in Hollywood in that year.
Awesome.
Yeah. We have an audience question. The person is Josh Mullen, and
Hello, thank you for joining us. So I know that Leonard Maltin dared to leave that view for the first Gremlins, and you are one of the few filmmakers who had the opportunity to kill off a film critic in one of his movies.
I'm not the only one who ever wanted to.
Namely,
I recommend a Vincent Price movie called Theater of Blood, in which a Shakespearean actor kills all the people who gave him bad reviews.
Can you speak to that experience of getting that just revenge?
Well, Leonard was a friend of mine. I'd known him in New Jersey when I was younger, and he is younger than I, and we used to go to the same conventions, and we were both film buffs, both film collectors, and so we had a pretty good relationship. And I was sorry he didn't like our movie, but he didn't kill our friendship. And so when it came time to make a sequel, I said, well, Leonard, it was kind of a wild, different version of Gremlins. And so we said, well, you want to come in and have the Gremlins kill you? You can write the review the way you want. You can say whatever bad things as long as the Gremlins get to kill you. And he was a good sport about it. And where he gives Gremlins 2 stars in his book, he gives Gremlins 2 3 stars, probably because he's in it.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Joe.
Awesome. My next question. I recently watched your film, The Burbs, and I was wondering, how did you combine horror and humor, and how did you convey that to the actors while you directed them?
Well, The Burbs has turned out to be, ironically, one of the most popular movies I was ever involved with, despite the fact that it got the worst reviews since Mein Kampf when it came out. It was a movie that was the first movie of Ron Howard and Bron Grazer's company, Imagine, and they thought of it as a Rear Window spoof, which I didn't think it was. But the problem was it was being made during a writer's strike. And so usually I like to have the writer on the set and, to have them talk to the actors and, and if there's any problem that comes up, the writer can handle it. But in this case, we couldn't do that. So because it was all set in one location, which is the Universal backlot, we said, well, let's shoot it in sequence. And then if the actors want to improvise, we can go with those improvs. Ordinarily in improvisational movies, if they're shot out of sequence, the improvs sometimes don't jive with the things that have already been shot. But in this case, we allowed them to create their characters as the movie was being told. And some of the funniest things in the movie are complete ad libs. I mean, they're just things that just happen. They're not in the script, and nobody even knew what anybody was going to say. And half the time, it's not even on screen because it was off screen. But it's not a plot movie because it hasn't got much of a plot. It's a behavioral movie. And the thing about the movie for me that was fun was that the actors were so much fun and were so into their characters. And they literally were total partners in the making of what became that movie.
A question I have is, how was your relationship with your editor, Mark Goldblatt, when captured a tone and feeling The Howling?
Well, Mark and I were friends beforehand, and he had worked on Piranha with me, and became, as it turned out, one of the premier editors in Hollywood. I could never afford him after that. But I always wanted to edit my own movies. But when I talked to Sam Fuller about editing movies, and Sam always said, it's better if you edit your own movies, but the studio won't let you do it because they're afraid to give you too much power. And also there's a problem in that you can't wait to edit your movie until all the stuff is shot. You've got to be able to edit it while it's going on. So while I was doing those 2 pictures, Mark was cutting the movie and then I was shooting, and then I came back and then we would work on it together. We had a great relationship. He was a terrific editor. And as I said, I place a lot of stock in editing. I think editing it's sometimes what you don't show that makes the scene, and maybe something that you shoot that you thought was great and you don't want to cut it because it took you all day to do it. And then you run the movie and you go, geez, this really slows it down. You gotta get rid of this, and it's hard to part with that kind of stuff. But in the end, I like to think that most of my movies are fairly peppy. I mean, I don't think they're not a lot of slow, dull parts in them.
Oh, and I agree with that. Which I was wondering, because your movies have such like a good happy middle ground between humor and kind of like suspense, and like culty classic. What would you say your relationship with science fiction and horror and comedy are?
Well, I grew up with science fiction and horror because I was a kid. I mean, in the 50s, and of course, it was the atomic fear era, and we all thought that the bomb was going to drop any minute. I made a whole movie about it actually, and so the giant insects and the giant people and the small people, the shrinking people, whatever. It taught us a very healthy skepticism about authority, and which I think led to a lot of the hippie uprising later in the decade. But I've always loved science fiction. I saw this. I made my father take me to see a movie called Tarantula, which is about a giant spider. And he was a golf pro, and he came home late, and he was always tired. But it was only playing on Thursday and Friday, and it wasn't playing on Saturday, so I couldn't see it at the matinee. And so he was a good father, and he took me to see Tarantula, which terrified me so much that I spent most of the movie out in the lobby pacing, and occasionally looking back at the screen, and then being scared and then going back and pacing. And I mean that's dedication. But and my parents would say, well, if these pictures upset you so, why do you want to see them? And I couldn't answer it. I mean, I needed to see these pictures. I needed to be scared. I needed to deal with fear. I needed to figure out what it was that made me scared. And there was always something wider and bigger and stranger than real life. And that appealed to me. And so when I got my chance to make my first couple of pictures, of course, they ended up being science fiction pictures and horror pictures. And then I got typed, which, is in a sense is limiting, but on the other hand is like, well, at least it's something I like.
Joe, you talked about Tarantula. Did you ever get to work with Jack Arnold? Did you ever talk with him? And
I knew Jack, and his daughter cast Piranha and Howling, because she was an actress. And Jack was a wonderful guy. By the time I met him, he'd actually lost a leg. He had a leg amputated. And there was supposed to be a remake of The Creature in the Black Lagoon. Universal treated Jack very well, even though it was hard to work with him because he was incapacitated. So John Landis had an idea to do a remake of Creature in the Black Lagoon, and I was the batter up director in case Jack couldn't climb a hill or Jack couldn't go someplace. And so Joel work on it too, and he'll help out. Ultimately, for various reasons, it didn't get made, but there was a lot of tests made, and they had a pretty good suit. But then Guillermo del Toro said that he wanted to make The Creature of the Black Lagoon, and for some reason Universal said, no, we want to make our own Creature of the Black Lagoon, which they never made. And so he went off and he said, well, okay, I'll just make my own movie. And he made Shape of Water, which won an Academy Award. So I guess they were a little miffed that they hadn't taken him up on his offer.
Joe, a question I have is, could you tell me your love of the Looney Tunes cartoons?
Well, that's another thing. I'm sure this will be alien to you, but when I was a kid, they used to run cartoons with the movies. And there were newsreels and there were serial chapters. And you got a whole night at the movies, even if it wasn't a double feature. And so I grew up watching cartoons. And on a Saturday matinee, there would be 10 cartoons and 2 features for a quarter. And everybody would line up and we would see a whole panoply of different kind of cartoons. And the Disneys were the most popular, of course. But the second most popular was the Warner Brothers. Then you got down to Woody Woodpecker, and then you got down to the really dregs. You got into the Casper the Friendly Ghost, and these horrible cartoons that nobody liked, but they were cheap to rent, and so they would run them. But I was a huge Looney Tunes fan, and when I finally got to meet Chuck Jones, I gushed all over, and I met Bob Clampett, I met a lot of the Fritz Freeling, I met all these guys, and they were wonderful people. and not used to being recognized because, you know, people used to go to these cartoons and they wouldn't pay much attention. They didn't see any care about the credits or anything like that. But over the years, there were various kiddie shows and things that they would run these cartoons on, and kids became more and more familiar with the characters. And when I finally got a chance to make a Looney Tunes picture, I did it after Chuck had passed away because they had made a movie called Space Jam using those characters, and Chuck was not happy with the way it turned out. And so I took the job just because I wanted to be able to honor Chuck's version of who he thought those characters were. And it was a very difficult movie to make because the studio hated the idea of making cartoons. It was only the marketing people who wanted to make the picture. And so they gave me nothing but trouble for a year and a half. But in the end, I still got to make a Bugs Bunny movie, which is, you know, something to have on your resume. I got Bugs Bunny, I got Robbie the Robot, I got all the people who really meant something to me.
That's excellent. We have a question from our Discord. Your name is Francis.
Hello. I wanted to talk a little bit more about Roger Corman because I think it's sometimes difficult to quantify his influence and the degree to which the filmmakers of your generation kind of are indebted to his services. So how do you feel that working and getting to make pictures for him made you a better filmmaker, and how do you feel that strengthened your peers as well?
Well, all of us who worked for Roger were dealing with a basic one-man film school. The movies were very low budget. There wasn't a lot of time, but you learned an immense amount of how to make a movie. You learned how to make a decision. You learned how to do something, how to take advantage of an opportunity or a mistake or something that happened that you could then turn to your advantage. And you just look at the roster of people who've gone through the so-called Roger Corman school. I mean, it's everybody from Martin Scorsese to James Cameron to Francis Coppola. I mean, these are heavyweight people. And if it wasn't for Roger Corman, the movie business wouldn't have been like it was in the 20th century because none of these people probably would have been able to get those opportunities because in order to make a union picture, you had to be in the union. But in order to get in the union, you had to make a union picture, but you couldn't if you weren't. So everybody sort of jumped the line and said, okay, I'm going to learn how to make a movie, but I'm not going to have to be in the union until I make work for a studio. And then, of course, when you do work for a studio, you discover that Roger Corman knew a hell of a lot more about making movies than any of the people who are running the studios because they're all executives and they're either on their way in or on their way out. But this guy was a filmmaker. And between Roger Corman and Steven Spielberg, I was lucky to work for people who actually knew how to make a movie. And if you had a question or a problem, you could go to them and they actually understood what you were talking about. I discovered later, when I wasn't working for those guys, that I could go to people with problems and say, but what are you talking about? Go away. Just give it to me on Tuesday. And I think that, unfortunately, that attitude has prevailed even more so these days now that the movies are so expensive.
I have a question for people our age in film school right now. What have you seen from independent filmmakers that you've appreciated or enjoyed?
Well, independent film is where it is. I mean, I think if you look at what the studios are making, it's so safe and so unimaginative and so wedded to, you know, doing something that's already been done because it's safe. I go to the movies. I used to go to the movies incessantly. I used to go like every weekend. And since COVID, I've been going less often, only because the movies don't interest me that much unless they're independent movies. And I have a podcast called The Movies That Made Me, and we have guests who usually are making pictures like Last Stop in Yuma County and movies that are offbeat and interesting, and the kind of movies that were made in the 60s when I started to fall in love with movies. And I feel that independent filmmaking is the way to go. I mean, personally, I haven't made a studio movie since Looney Tunes, which was such a horrible experience that I didn't want to repeat it. So everything else I've done has been independent. And there's less money, and yes, there's less time, but there's also less people looking over your shoulder who don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah, that is like very unfortunate. Something I was actually very curious about was a piece of advice that both Roger Corman and Steven Spielberg gave to you that you applied in your filmmaking career.
Well, Roger used to say, try to sit down a lot. The problem would be there were no chairs, so that didn't work out. And Steven Spielberg's advice, I can't remember any specific piece of advice, but the great thing about Spielberg was that he was totally on the side of the filmmaker, and these were studio movies I was making, and there was always a buffer between me and the studio. And if there were studio notes and he looked at them and he didn't like them, he wouldn't show them. And so he was, and also he would insist on previewing the movie in the director's version and finishing it and mixing it and doing all the sound effects and stuff and taking out a finished version of the movie for the audience to look at and make decisions about what to do. Whereas for the most part, the studios just put together a rough cut and have it be splicey and put chalk marks on it and stuff and have it look unfinished. And you never really got the right audience reaction from that as you would from a movie that looks like it's finished.
Yeah, we're gonna pull another Discord question from Rowan.
Hey Joe, it's such a pleasure to talk to you.
We just finished watching Gremlins, which I watched incessantly when I was a kid. But specifically, it's one of my closest friends' favorite movie. So he wanted me to ask, like, if there was an overall guiding vision, what was the just overall principle that you had on set while you were making Gremlins?
Well, the overall principle was, how do we make these damn puppets work? They kept breaking. I mean, the original script had the Gremlins, had the cute Gizmo character turn into the bad gremlin after about a half an hour. And when we were doing our tests and stuff, Steven Spielberg said, I like this character. I think he should stick around for the whole movie, which was like horrifying for us because we just had this little bucket of bolts and fur, and we thought, well, we can get away with it for half an hour. But now he has to be like the hero of the movie. But I think that in retrospect, that's one of the reasons that the whole franchise has been so popular for all these years, is because the audience really identified with this sort of baby-like character. It's essentially a boy and his dog movie, except he already had a dog, but now he's got an extra pet. And I'm hard pressed to explain exactly why this thing is still so popular, but it's survived a crazy sequel, and it's survived many attempts to make another one that they can't figure out how to do because they didn't understand the first one. And now it's an animated series on Max, which I am somewhat involved with, and I think is really a clever idea, because after we sort of blew up the whole concept in Gremlins 2, there was, well, how are we going to make a Gremlins 3? They killed all the Gremlins. And they said, well, let's go back and make a prequel. And so the prequel is about the Mr. Wing character who owns the Mogwai when he was a little boy, and how he first got to meet the Mogwai in China in the early 1900s. And it's a very good show. And it's not many people have seen it because it's on Max, and a lot of people don't get Max. But I'm very proud to be associated with it.
Thank you.
With that of the topic of remakes, I was wondering if you had an opinion on modern remakes of classic movies.
Well, I'm not against remakes. Some of people's favorite movies, The Wizard of Oz was a remake. The Maltese Falcon was a remake. I mean, there's a lot of good remakes. I mean, the question is, why are you remaking it? Are you doing what Heaven Can Wait did with Here Comes Mr. Jordan, where they're taking a really good movie from the 40s and they're updating it to the 70s and still using the same premise, and so the two things can exist together? Or are they just doing a ripoff? Are they just trying to imitate the same thing over and over? And that was my worry about Gremlins 2 when they asked me to do it is I said, I don't want to just make the same movie over again, which is exactly what they wanted. They wanted the same movie over again. Just change some dialogue, add some new characters. And so we said no, and they couldn't figure out anybody to make the sequel. And so they came to me late, I think, and said, we'll let you do whatever you want if you make the sequel for us. And I said, really? And they were true to their word. They let me do whatever I wanted, and I made a movie about why there shouldn't be a sequel to Gremlins.
So you're talking to a room full of like 18, 19, 20-year-old undergraduates. If you had a time machine and you could go back to yourself around this age, what would you tell yourself? What's the advice that you wish that you'd known back then?
I don't even know if I would recognize myself if I went back to see how, because I'm a different person. I mean, the one thing you discover is that everything changes and you change based on the things around you. And so people ask me how do I break into the movie business? And I tell them, it doesn't make any difference what I say. It's completely changed. It's not the same business it was when I got in there. It's not the same. You don't get in the same way. It's not the same stuff. We don't shoot on film anymore. And nobody knows what the markets are, and now it's streaming, or is it streaming, and how many superhero movies can you make before you wear it out? So I'm not a fountain of knowledge about what people should do, but I do think one thing to be happy about is that the technology has improved so much that it's so much easier to make a movie now than it was when I was doing it. It's so less cumbersome, and if you care about movie history. There are so many movies from the dawn of movies that you can see now that were impossible to see when I was a film buff, and you had to wait up until 3 a.m. to see some movie that you wanted and put Clockwork Orange toothpicks in your eye to try to stay awake. But now you can just you can stream it, you can get a DVD, you can whatever. I mean, all these things, movies that haven't been seen for 70 years are now available. And my advice to everybody who has to make a movie is learn about old movies, is see old movies, see the great movies, see movies that aren't great, see movies that didn't work, and find out why they didn't work. I mean, everybody has a favorite movie, and some people's favorite movie is Plan 9 from Outer Space. I mean, everybody's different. So the more you can immerse yourself in movies, the better it's going to be for you.
I absolutely love your response. And a question I had was like, how much of your personality is in your films?
I like to think a lot of it, which has probably kept me from making more movies. But to me, it's if I read a script and I don't think that I'm the right guy to do it, I don't do it. Even if it's going to be a blockbuster, it's like no, I'm not. It's if I can't relate to it, if I wouldn't go see it, I certainly wouldn't make it. And so one of the struggles I've had is to try to maintain my personality while working for major studios, where the temptation is to homogenize everything and cut off the edges and try to make everybody has to love this. Well, no, not everybody can love this, because that's not the way movies work. Some people will love it, some people might hate it. But take a look at Megalopolis and see what the story is with people, and see what the different reactions to it are. But here's a guy who worked on this movie for 30 years. And there's a lot of things wrong with that movie, but it's inspiring to watch somebody with that much talent make a movie, even if it's bomb, which it is. But I respect that. I have a tremendous amount of respect for people who actually get to make what they want and make it personal.
That's a beautiful response. And we're going to pull a question from the Discord. Valkyrie?
Hi, thank you for zooming in with us tonight. So so did you see the kind of cultural cult impact that Gremlins had coming, or did it come out of completely nowhere for you?
Came out of nowhere. Usually when you make a movie, you figure, well, it'll play for a little while, and then it'll become another movie, and then it'll be on TNT, in 2 years. But this was surprising because it opened well, and it opened bigger the next week, and it opened bigger the next week, and it became this phenomenon, which I happen to think that it was a sort of a luck of the draw. I think if that movie had come out a year earlier or a year later, it might not have been, but that was the sweet spot. That was the moment that picture needed. But what has surprised me is the longevity that this movie has, and because it's also partly because it's a Christmas movie, and people do tend to want to watch it at Christmas for reasons that escape me. But it is a Christmas movie, and it's obviously it's popular enough to bankroll this cartoon series, and I keep getting bombarded with when is there going to be a Gremlins 3? When is and it's like, well, there isn't. There will be eventually because it's too major a title to not do something with. But I don't know what there is to do with it unless Daniel Clamp becomes president of the United States and the Gremlins follow him into the White House, which apparently is happening this year. So.
If I can ask a little bit of a follow-up, what do you think about that time made it so? What about the culture at that time do you think made it so relevant?
Well, this was the Reagan era. This was the Just Say No era. And I think there was a certain anarchy about the movie, and that I think appealed to people who felt stifled. And it is a movie about not following the rules and what happens when you don't follow the rules. And listen, if I knew what made movies hits, I would have made more of them.
Understandable. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Joe, I really love Small Soldiers. There's such a morality to it. And it's such a harsh sort of condemnation of capitalism. How did you get away with that? I mean, they did market the action figures.
Well, that's kind of what I do. I get away with stuff. That's kind of the way I felt about Gremlins 2, and certainly Small Soldiers, which was a fairly contentious movie to make because it had been sitting on the shelf at DreamWorks for a number of years because the technology didn't exist to make it. And so when I finally got to it, we were going to do it all with puppets, and it turned out that actually it was more practical to do a lot of it with CGI. So anytime the puppets walk any distance, they're CGI, and if they're standing still and talking to the characters, then they're puppets. But it was I consider it Gremlins 3. I mean, any movies that I make that have little small characters that can bite your ankles is a Gremlins movie to me.
Since Gremlins has such a effect on pop culture still, and people dress as Gremlins for Halloween, and there's just so many different ones you can choose from. Do you have a favorite Gremlin from either movie?
Well, I go to these conventions every so often, and I see that one of the most popular Gremlins is, she didn't have a name when we made the movie, but in Gremlins 2, there's a female Gremlin who has now been named by the marketing department Greta Gremlin. And there are a tremendous number of people who wear Greta Gremlin costumes, which apparently are not just for cosplay, but for Halloween. I mean, I think they market them. And she's talking about stereotype. I mean, come on, she's pretty out there. I also I like the Brain Gremlin because Tony Randall was so great to work with, and he's so funny. And once we got them to talk, they opened up a whole new area which is exploited in the cartoon series. And also I like the Bat Gremlin because he flies around and he was a cool design. But that's all Rick Baker stuff. But in the original Gremlins, Chris Walas designed the Gremlins, and it was an amazing task that he did on not a lot of money. To make these things look real was just an astonishing achievement, I thought, because it was so hard. There were so many people under so many floors, behind so many walls, working these puppets and trying to make them look real, that we were astonished that we got away with it. As I say, got away with it.
I don't, Professor, can I show him my Greta?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned Greta the Gremlin because she's my favorite Gremlin, and I made something for it the occasion. Let's see here.
You're down here.
Oh,
There's
that's her.
Yeah.
That's her.
Yeah.
You got the lipstick right.
I've noticed a lot too that she's kind of just kind of the drag queen of the Gremlins, and I very much love that.
You
about
could
her.
say that, yes. That wasn't in mind when we did it, but I can certainly understand that.
Yeah.
What was your relationship with your film composers?
Well, I've had a couple of film composers, but I started with a guy named Pino Donaggio, who was an Italian composer who did Don't Look Now, which was a fabulous movie. And when it was suggested that he might want to do the score for Piranha, I couldn't believe it. I thought, "Are you kidding? This guy's going to make my movie." But he wanted to break into the American market, and so he did it. He did a great job, and then we used him again for The Howling, where he had this fabulous church organ that he'd found, and he did this great score. And then I lucked into Jerry Goldsmith when I did the Twilight Zone movie, because he had already been hired. And we hit it off, and I asked him to do Gremlins. And after that, every movie that I did that I could afford him for, which is not every movie, but most of them, I would use Jerry Goldsmith, because he was not only a fabulous composer, but a great guy, and we really got along. And he became a great friend, and I really missed the fact that he couldn't finish the last movie he did for me, Looney Tunes. He was too ill, and I had to bring a guy named John Debney in to do the last part of the movie. But he was music can be such an important part of a film, and there are certain films that have no music that work great. Targets is a movie that works great with no music, but I really believe in music. I'm a huge Bernard Herrmann fan, a John Barry fan. I mean, all these guys whose sometimes scores are better than the movies they're in. And so the most exciting part for me after making a movie is to go to the scoring session and see what the composer does with what you've given them. And we had a saying on the set where if things weren't going well, we would say, "Oh, don't worry, Jerry will save it." And he always did.
Yeah, Jerry Goldsmith really made your films just so beautiful. I love the music in your films. We're gonna pull a Discord question right now.
Yes.
You guys, let's do this and then two more, and we'll wrap. Yep.
Hey Joe, thanks for coming in. The question I have is, what's a film that you can go back to as a spring for inspiration or craft, or it's just one that you kind of consistently rewatch?
A movie that I rewatch for inspiration?
Yes.
Well, I don't really have to rewatch anything, because I've got so many movies in my head that I draw from, that sometimes I see a movie on TV and I go, "Oh God, I stole that shot." but I'm not aware of doing it, because I have so much stuff going on in my head. So many images have been inculcated in my head from watching movies. I've seen a lot of movies, and I love all the great movies, and I all the great directors, and the pictorial directors, anything shot by Greg Toland or John Alton, or I love film noir. I just have such a wide berth of things that I draw from, that I'm not conscious of drawing from any particular movie during a picture.
Interesting. Thank you so much.
My last question, it's gonna be a little bit of a silly question.
Well, that's appropriate.
I was wondering, would you rather be locked in a room with 5 gremlins who were fed after midnight, Anthony from It's a Good Life, or a tank of military hybrid piranhas?
A tank of what?
Military hybrid piranhas.
Oh, piranhas. I thought you said bras. I wasn't aware of military bras. No piranhas, please. I could probably deal with Anthony. I think I could make a case for talking him into something. The gremlins, you can't talk into anything.
Joe, that rabbit in Twilight Zone's haunted me for about 30 years now. Who did that?
That was Rob Bottin.
Rob Bottin.
Rob Bottin worked with me first on Piranha when he was like 17. And there's a head that bobs up at the resort, and that's Rob's head. That was in a sequence that I let Rob direct, which is not in the movie, because we couldn't give him sound, so he went out and did a segment about 2 deaf people where he had a guy and a girl who are on the banks of a river, and then they fall in and the piranhas eat him. It didn't make it into the movie, but his head was, looked pretty good, so that's in the movie. But then Rob did, when Rick Baker had to leave The Howling to do John Landis's movie, Rob took over and did an incredible job on The Howling with very little money. And then he obviously started to rise to fame, and then we did the Twilight Zone movie, where Rob created these cartoon monster characters, which are pretty creepy, and this amazing rabbit, this monster rabbit thing that was a giant puppet that had to be shot at, it had to be undercranked. So Kevin McCarthy, the actor, had to slow down. He had to slow down his reactions in order for it to work, because anyway, I won't go into the details, but it's a wonderful bit, and a lot of people remember that as being one of the scarier parts of the movie, along with the girl with no mouth. That's another thing that Mike Nichols once told me, that his daughter was freaked out by seeing the girl with no mouth in the Twilight Zone movie. So I thought, well, I made a great director's daughter freak out, so I guess I've arrived.
And for our final question, what was the film you're most proud of and why?
It's like asking which kid do you like better, there are some movies I like better than others, but there's some that worked. A movie that worked out as well as I thought it would was Interspace. I thought that turned out to be just as good as I hoped it would be. There are other movies that I've had to make compromises on, like Explorers, which, was released in a rough cut and wasn't even finished. I have a lot of affection for it, but it's not the movie I wanted to make. But I made a movie that nobody's seen, really, called The Second Civil War, which for HBO, which is about it's about the title. It's about what happens when a group of orphans are sent to a state in America, and they are turned back, and the governor decides to start a war over it. And it's got a great cast, and it's very prescient. It predicted many things that have already happened, and some things that are about to happen. And you can see it on YouTube, I think, and you can see it on Amazon Prime. And it's got the best cast I ever worked with. But and it was a difficult movie to make, but I think overall it's the movie I may be the most happy with.
Yeah, you got to work with James Earl Jones on
Yes, it was fabulous, and he was having eye trouble at the time, and it was amazing. You never knew it until afterward. He said, I can't read these things," and he was just a fabulous. Everybody in the movie was great. I mean, all these actors that were, many of whom are now gone, but it's a terrific cast.
So we have a little tradition. You're up on a giant movie screen right now. We ask people in the audience if they want you to come up on stage, and we take a selfie with you. Do you mind if we do that?
And how do we do that?
You just have to stand there. They're going to stand in front of you, and we're going to
that's fine. You want me to stand up and make more space on the bottom?
No, you're good. You're good. Come on up if you want to picture with Joe Dante.
I don't know.
So that you can see.
Wow, there's a lot of you.
All right, we're going to read Gremlins 3. 1, 2, 3. All right, thank you so much, Joe.
Thanks, guys.